Today I'm going to be learning more about Canadian history and a little bit about Canadian geography, engineering I guess. So this is the engineering marvel built to defend against Americans. The grisly history of the Rideau Canal. So yeah, I just think it's a great title, something built just to defend against Americans. So not too sure. I don't really know anything about the Rideau Canal, not heard about it, so this should be very interesting. Tell me what you think about this, tell me what you know about the canal. Let's watch.
200 years ago, a British duke was traveling through the wilds of Upper Canada. He voyaged through a land of dense forests, impenetrable swamps, and roaring rapids, exploring the route of a new canal he hoped to build. But something was very wrong. The Duke was falling ill. And the further he traveled, the worse he felt. He stumbled out of his canoe, his body racked by spasms, and took shelter in a nearby barn, where, surrounded by his attendants, he soon took his final breaths. The Duke of Richmond would be the first to die trying to build the Rideau Canal, but he would be far from the last. Today, it's one of Canada's most beloved landmarks, a peaceful place known for winter skating parties and relaxing summer boat rides. But this picturesque waterway has a bloody past.
Does really look like a
It goes
beautiful
all the way back to its very origins. This is Canadiana. (1812). The United States declares war on the British Empire and invades the Canadian colonies. Tens of thousands of people are killed before the fighting comes to an end. And while the invaders are driven back across the border, fear of another war with the Americans lingers. Canada is vulnerable. The St. Lawrence is the main transportation route through the British colonies, but it's incredibly exposed. The United States is right there on the other side of the river. It was clear Canadians needed a safer transportation route in case of another war with the Americans. And if there wasn't a river that already fit the bill, well, they were just going to have to make one themselves. That's how the idea for the Rideau Canal was born. It would run from Kingston all the way up to the Ottawa River, which then flows down to Montreal, giving Canadians a way to travel from Lake Ontario to Quebec without having to sail past American guns. You can still find traces of those military routes today. 4 imposing blockhouses were built along the canal, like this one in Marrickville, a place to store weapons, muster the militia, and defend against any Americans who tried to destroy the waterway. The Duke of Richmond was one of the earliest champions of the project. He was the Governor General of the Canadian colonies, appointed just a few years after the war. And as a military man, a British officer who'd fought against Napoleon, he could see how strategically important the new waterway would be. But shortly before heading out on his tour of the future canal route, the Duke made a fatal mistake. The story of exactly what happened is a bit unclear, but according to most historians, he seems to have stopped the path to a soldier's pet fox. The animal had rabies and bit him on the hand. A few weeks later, the Duke was dead. This memorial marks the spot where he took his final breaths. The canal had lost its champion. And so it was years before work finally started on one of the most ambitious construction projects the continent had ever seen. 1800s engineering on a massive scale. 200 kilometers of waterways and dams and locks, some raising and lowering boats by as many as 8 stories at a single station. Uniting existing rivers and lakes as it winds its way through Ontario. Nearly all of it built by hand, right through the middle of tangled forests and treacherous marshland.
Is this like a well-known landmark in Canada? Is this something that everybody knows about? When you see it, it's like very beautiful, especially when you consider its age. But to know about its origins, why it was built, it just seems like such an interesting place to visit. And this sort of thing, like in the UK, for example, with canals, people can take canal boats down there. People like to go on holidays and go along those canals on those sort of boats. Is that something people would do in Canada on the Rideau Canal? Would people get like boats and go along there for like holidays and that sort of thing? It seems like such a picturesque, stunning landscape along there as well.
To oversee the project, they chose another military officer. This guy, Colonel John By. He had plenty of experience, even helped build the impressive fortifications of Quebec City. So he headed west, set up camp at the spot where the new canal would meet the Ottawa River on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and got to work. It would take 5 summers and thousands of workers to build the canal, most of them French Canadians or newly arrived Irish immigrants. They dug pits, hauled stone, and died by the hundreds. Some were blown up by their own explosives. Some killed while working on unstable dams. Others drowned. But more than anything else, they were killed by malaria. The disease swept through the work camps, unleashed from the marshes by hordes of mosquitoes, whose tiny bites carried deadly parasites. Even Colonel By himself fell ill, twice. The laborers protested against the wildly dangerous conditions, punishingly long hours, and low pay. They went on strike more than once, even rioted. But the work kept going, and the deaths kept coming. By the time the construction was finished, 1,000 people had been killed. On average, a life was lost for every 200 meters. At either end of the canal, you'll find a Celtic cross, erected in memory of those who died building the waterway, including this one here in Kingston. But of course, those dead workers left behind an even more impressive monument than that: the canal itself. Today, the Rideau Canal is an official World Heritage Site. UNESCO has called it a masterpiece of human creative genius. 2 centuries after it first opened, it's still a spectacular testament to the workers who built it. A massive historic site, meticulously preserved all the way down to the hand cranks that are still used to open and close its locks. But the extraordinary new waterway wouldn't be the workers' only legacy. The camp Colonel By pitched here at the mouth of the Rideau Canal would continue to grow even after the construction had finished, evolving and expanding until it became a thriving city. At first, it was named in honor of the Colonel, Bytown, but today we know it as Ottawa.
Excellently produced documentary as well. Yeah, go subscribe to their channel, go support them through Patreon. just a beautifully constructed documentary. And yeah, like an interesting part of history again, like these things that come from bad times. This was a time where, like, yeah, it's in here, like they wanted to defend themselves against the Americans. They had to take this alternative route by building this canal, and it ended up being a stunning piece of architecture and engineering that's still very beautifully kept today by the looks of it. As I mentioned, I compared to like canals in the UK, and a lot of the canals maybe in certain places aren't kept in the best state of repair, but this one looks pristine, running right through the heart of Ottawa. And yeah, like, tell me if you've ever been there before. What's it like to actually see it? Do you know the history of it? Is the history of that canal well known in Canada? And yeah, it's just like a really beautiful thing. Obviously, the sad part is the amount of deaths. I think a lot of these wonderful engineering marvels like come with a lot of death and yeah, a lot of bad conditions for workers usually. But it's nice to see them represented with those statues and yeah, as they said, with the canal itself. So tell me what you think about this one. Thanks.